Okay, so I'm trying some new things with this video, so bear with me. I have a script that I prepared, and I'm going to try following it just to be more clear in my videos. So I have a dog analogy later on, so stay tuned for that if everything else sucks. So today I'm talking about a lecture that Jordan Peterson gave 3 years ago, or at least it was uploaded to YouTube 3 years ago. And in it, he was discussing basically good and bad, and he was discussing specifically Benatar's book. So the good and bad between suffering and pleasure and all that stuff, all that good stuff. So in it, he goes on to say that we weight pleasure and suffering differently in life, and because we don't have any numbers to that measurement, it's arbitrary. But then he goes on in that same clip, I didn't listen to the whole lecture, but in that same clip he goes on to say that life is a series of crucial ethical decisions that we're constantly wrestling with. So the wrestling part is important here because it suggests a kind of suffering, a kind of uncomfortableness with the world as we experience it through consciousness. And it implies that there's a disproportionate amount of suffering to pleasure. So if it's part of our consciousness to constantly weigh good and bad, then it is part of the grain of our existence. So there's a constant struggle. So it's what David Benatar would call an empirical asymmetry. So this imbalance between good and bad. Now Benatar does believe in there being much more bad or suffering in the world than there is pleasure. But for Jordan Peterson, I'm not sure if this is what he's saying when he says that these crucial ethical decisions, the struggle between good and bad that we're constantly fighting in our heads. I'm not sure if he's explicitly saying or implying that there is more suffering than pleasure in life. He just thinks, even if he just thinks that we weight it differently, right? Now, Benatar brings up a different asymmetry, and a different empirical asymmetry, and that's knowledge. And there is no way that even the best and the brightest of us can know everything that there is to know in the world. So he says that this is an asymmetry, an empirical asymmetry between what we can know and what there is available, the knowledge that's available in the world. So the same thing applies to, suffering and pleasure. There's more suffering in the world than there is pleasure. So what do we expect to be like? What do we expect when we have children then? That our children are just going to be Pollyanna-ish, and that they're just going to, even though there's more suffering in the world, they're just going to feel better about it. Is that a criteria for bringing kids into the world? And don't forget that before children existed, they had no desire for either suffering or pleasure in their experiences, because they didn't exist. There was a void. So there was no need for either of it, pleasure or suffering, or however you see pleasure in relation to suffering, whether it's a good thing that leads to a bad thing or a bad thing that leads to a good thing. There was no desire for it because they never existed. So it's important to keep that in mind. So back to the empirical asymmetry. If you're a parent deciding to have kids, even if they weigh the pleasure more than they do the suffering in life, before they come in existence and you're considering having them, is the empirical asymmetry something that you consider before you bring them into existence? And here's the dog analogy. Say you were gonna adopt a dog, right? But your house emits a high-pitched frequency that really bothers that dog. But you feed them well, you take them for walks, things like that, but this high-pitched frequency just constantly is there. Would you think differently about adopting that dog? Hopefully that analogy makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of like the question I'll leave you with. So yeah, that's my video. Bye.